You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Megan Campisi.
Authors. I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web. Before We Ever Spoke by Dan Largent. Cleveland, Ohio, 2006. After a chance encounter, three people soon find out that life can sometimes thrust us into the public eye, even when taking great measures to avoid it. Cooper Madison was the best pitcher in baseball after being drafted number 1 overall in 1996 from the small Gulf Coast town of Pass Christian, Mississippi. 1 year after announcing his sudden and shocking retirement, he finds himself seeking anonymity in Cleveland, Ohio. Kara Knox is the youngest sibling to 3 older brothers. After a tragic work accident to her closest relative, she has built up a tough exterior as she begins her final year of college at Cleveland State University. Jason Knox, Kara's oldest brother, is the lead detective on Cleveland's Edgewater Park killer case. After months without a suspect, he's feeling the heat from his media-hungry chief. Serendipity intervenes, and all three learn that perception and reality are paths that rarely ever intersect. Before We Ever Spoke by Dan Largent. Hey folks, you really ought to check out Patricia Gillum's Heroes of Corvus series. Book 1 is called A Superhero's Duty. A fight between a second-generation superhero named Red Bolt and a villain for hire named Icarus goes terribly wrong, resulting in the drowning deaths of 3 innocent civilians and orphaning a 6-year-old boy. Racked with guilt, Red Bolt visits Cameron Wilson at the hospital every night and won't leave the boy's side until he falls asleep. Befriended by a night shift nurse, the man in costume begins to disclose what really happened after the fight and why he feels the death of Cameron's parents and sister fall on his actions. A superhero didn't survive that night, and Cameron and the rest of the city are not out of danger. A Superhero's Duty, Book 1 of the Heroes of Corvus by Patricia Gillum. Get this series now. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Megan Campisi on the show with me today. She has a phenomenal new book called Sin Eater that is a fantastic read. You're really going to want this book for your bookshelf. Welcome to the show, Megan.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Megan, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
So, in all truth, I started out as the actor in the family, and theater was my initial passion. And I followed that, and I went into theater, and I studied theater, and then I started my own theater company. But as I was creating new work, I started falling in love with writing. And so it really started a little bit later, I would say when I was in my mid 20s. And then I turned really to novels when my first child was born, and getting to theater rehearsals just became impractical. And so I decided to try long form. So I came to it late in life.
The were you a so you were the actor in the family?
Yes.
Do you remember making up plays and writing things to perform for the family when you were little?
Absolutely. I have two sisters, and we were constantly putting on performances for my very patient parents. We, and we would draw on anything. If we saw a movie, we saw the movie Grease,
Yeah.
and we must have done, 10 different performances based on that, with costumes, not understanding half of the lyrics of the songs, because we were little. I remember, don't go to bed till you're legally wed, Sandra D. And I did not understand what that meant. I thought it was talking about, bedtime.
Right.
But
Well, there were double and triple entendres all through that.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, for sure. But so yes, we were always performing.
That's so funny. Were there ever adults who recognized this thing in you, the storytelling thing, even though it manifested as wanting to act out? Was there ever a teacher or your parents? Did they encourage this behavior?
Well, my parents were definitely super supportive, but there was a high school teacher, a creative writing teacher named Stan Washburn. I went to school in Oakland, California, and he was amazing. And he's a writer himself, and he was so positive. He was a very quiet presence, but super encouraging. And that was the first time that someone kind of read my writing, and I felt like, oh, maybe I could do this.
So, was this something that you pursued when you went to college? Like, was this something that you knew was gonna, take you on a journey in life?
Even in college, I was studying theater in college, and then in graduate school, I went to graduate school in Paris, and I studied theater there. So really, it kind of was a little bit of a left turn. Once I had a theater company and we were making work, I would find that when it came down to writing, putting the story together, plotting, doing dialogue, that I always wanted to be the one with my hands in it, and that just became more and more a part of my life until I switched to really doing some playwriting, where I was just start to finish the writer. And then that's the point that I turned to novels.
What was that transition for you, going from performer to the primarily a playwright? The part of what drives an actor, and my whole family has been in community theater, and we have lots of our kids have been in plays throughout their whole school lives, and my son now directs a youth company, and so there's there's something that comes from performing in front of people and taking the words and bringing them to life. But being the person on the other side who is imagining what people will do with your words, what was that transition like for you?
Well, I think at first there was just a big identity shift, because I had always seen myself as an actor, and I'd always identified with theater. That was my art form. And so it was hard at first to kind of see myself in a new role. At the very beginning, it was just, oh, I'm just doing a little bit of this. I'm just doing a little bit of this, but I'm still an actor. And then gradually, I just had to admit to myself that, I'm still happy to act, and in fact, I teach at a theater conservatory to this day, the writing is really where I'm going to spend my time. And I think that even when I'm writing, I bring a lot of that performance background into my work. When I'm thinking through characters, I'm definitely acting them out in my own mind. I'm walking through what they would do physically, and thinking about the physical space, as opposed to, I guess, thinking in images rather than just verbally when I'm writing.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by how a sense of place tends to seep into our writing, and especially when someone is writing about a setting that just kind of almost becomes a character in the book. And I know you mentioned that you grew up on the West Coast. I think that you live on the East Coast now. Is that right?
It's true. It's true.
and you spent time in Europe. You said you went to college in France. How do you feel like the places that you've lived and some of the the surroundings that you've absorbed have affected you as a writer?
I think that when you are moving to a new place, there's always that sense of unsettledness or rootlessness until you settle. And I think I've felt that in every big move that I've made. When I first moved to the East Coast, and then when I moved to France, and then even moving back to the East Coast again. And honestly, certainly right now, we're in isolation. I'm actually I'm isolating with my family in North Carolina. So my whole family came down here. So it's always this moment of figuring out the new culture. And even from one side of the country to another, it can be a new culture, even from state to state. So I think that that's definitely reflected in Sin Eater, in the place, the sense of homelessness or finding your place, figuring out those rituals, figuring out how you make your own home.
Right. And that definitely bleeds through on an emotional level in the book, and I really want to explore that in just a minute. But your bio says that you also spent time as a forest ranger and a sous chef in Paris.
Yes.
Holding forest ranger, sous chef, and playwright / actor. How do those three things collide?
So they are all definitely core parts of myself, but obviously so very different. When I was in college, I spent the summers working as a forest ranger, and this was in Washington State in the Olympic Peninsula, and I was working as a backcountry ranger. And so I was really backpacking 10 days at a time alone along the coastline, clearing trails and doing search and rescue. And there's something, maybe part of it was growing up on the West Coast around a lot of outdoors, a lot of mountains. It's something that's deep in me. I love that solitude. I'm very comfortable being alone. But at the same time, I have this other part of me, and I don't know that there's a clear matchup. I think sometimes we have these very disparate parts of ourselves, but I also love the city. And so when I went to drama school in Paris, and while I was there, I needed a job to make money. So I started working in a restaurant, and the chef was self-taught. So I started as a waitress, and I asked her if I could start training in the kitchen, and she agreed. And so then I was working as a cook. But I think that what binds that to the forest ranging, if believe it or not, is that it's a very visceral thing. You're working with your hands. There are high stakes moments in the kitchen, even though maybe it's just a cake, but you got to get it right for the customers. And the same thing, when you're out in the forest, sometimes it's just simply beautiful, but sometimes you're like, oh my goodness, I have to climb up this cliff before the tide comes in, and so there can be those moments where you really have to bring all of yourself to bear on the situation. And I love that kind of intensity.
Absolutely. What brought you around to wanting to write fiction as someone who spent so much time and has done so much work in building the theater and working in that aspect, why did you choose to sit down and write prose?
Mm. Well, I think to me, the storytelling is storytelling, no matter what form it takes. And a lot of my plays are historical fiction, and that's one of my passions. I love reading historical fiction. I love watching movies that are historical, and so choosing novel like prose, part of it really was fitting my lifestyle at the time. As I mentioned, having a baby at home, it was easier to fit in times to write when it could just be me and a computer, and that's a lot easier with prose. Because when you're writing theater, you need to be in and out of rehearsal rooms, trying things out, having actors say the words. Whereas prose, you have a little bit more freedom to do it as a solo act.
The character of May is a sin eater in the book
Mm-hmm.
Sin Eater. How did the character of May come to you?
Well, she definitely has a lot of similarities in with me as a younger person. Of course, she is in a much different situation than I was in growing up, but her coming of age really mirrors a little bit of my own, kind of the sense of identity shifting and understanding how you fit into the world shifting. And so some of her quirks and traits, I was definitely drawing on myself and then other people that I know.
The idea of a sin eater, this
Mm-hmm.
is something that has kind of gone out of common vernacular.
Yeah.
But what is this? What's the idea behind a sin eater?
So it was a real thing, mostly in kind of small pockets of the UK. And the idea is that originally in history, a social pariah would eat a piece of bread on a person's coffin. And by doing that, they would be taking the person's sins onto their own soul, kind of absolving the dead so they could pass unblemished into the next world. And so that's how it existed in our world. And I think the last sin eater passed away in the early 1900s.
What a bizarre concept.
Absolutely.
And especially in our modern society, we think, well, I mean, does that do anything? But in that context, you've got this outcast, this pariah, and in her mind, she's absorbing the sins of all these people and carrying this burden. What must that have done to someone's psyche? I can only imagine the mental anguish that must go with that.
hmm I was really inspired I was raised Catholic, and when I was around 12 years old, one of my relatives sat me down and was like, okay, so we carry sin on us. We have original sin. We're essentially damned, and we don't know if it's redeemable or not. And I remember when I learned that, I was just devastated. And so when I encountered sin eaters, I thought, wow, what if a young woman was essentially cursed, not by just, one relation who had her opinion, but by her whole society? How would she go on, and would she be able to reconcile it? Would there be a moment where she could decide for herself instead of society telling her that she was not necessarily good or bad? She was just a person like everyone.
Right. When did the idea for this book start forming for you? And what was I'm always fascinated by that little kernel of a story that starts growing and growing. And sometimes it starts as, the weirdest thing. And maybe the end product doesn't even really resemble the original kernel. But I'm fascinated where stories begin. How did this story start for you?
So I had known about sin eaters and was just fascinated by, as you said, it's such an unusual ritual and that we know so little about it. So that had really struck my fancy. And then when I started writing prose, I knew I wanted to write historical, and I knew I wanted to write a mystery. And I just thought, wow, a sin eater and a young one who's, coming of age would be such an interesting person to follow, because in my book, I changed what happened in the real world. I made sin eating not just a post-mortem ritual, but added in the confession. Because again, as someone who had been raised Catholic, confession is a big part of a big communion. It's a ritual and it's very important. And so I added that in and I thought, wow, if she's taking confessions, she's going to have information that no one else has. And that would be a really interesting place for a mystery to start. But then I wanted to complicate it and give her challenges. And so because she was a social pariah, I decided to add in that there would be no speaking to see where that would lead. And it opened some interesting doors and new passages.
It does. This is a kind of an alternative history, historical fiction in the best sense. Why did you choose to make it a fictional setting?
Well, it has a lot to do with this, what I was saying about the post-mortem ritual. So if it's just a post-mortem ritual, then the sin eater doesn't get to interact with the person who's passing. And I really wanted that to be a deep, meaningful communion between two people. And I wanted sin eaters to be widespread in society so that this young woman would interact with everybody, from the highest of the high, the queen and the courtiers, down to the lowest of the low. And so in order to do that, the history of sin eating, that's not it. So I needed to change things up. And Elizabethan England is a period that I love. And it also has two things that I thought were critical. Number one, it has a monarch who's a woman, which allows kind of a foil. You've got this strong queen who's trying to figure out how to make choices in her life. And then you've got this sin eater with absolutely no power who's trying to make decisions in her life. And you get to see those two sides. And then the other thing that Elizabethan England gives is just this wonderful environment of religious turmoil. You've got the fights between Queen Elizabeth and her sister. And so I wanted to absorb those into the Sin Eater's world.
What's really great is you've really set the stage with the character of May and the restrictions that are put on her. You really set the stage for a great mystery, and almost a historical thriller, because the stakes are high. You've tied our protagonist's hands in a way that just beg for some great conspiracy, to go on, and a mystery that needs to be unraveled. Are you a fan of mysteries and these kind of high stakes stories?
I do enjoy them, I will say. C.J. Sansom is one of my favorite mystery writers, and he writes about the Tudor period. And yeah, so yes, I'm a fan.
I love it. When you started, well, first off, did you know when you first started thinking about this idea, did you know this was going to be a book? Were you thinking about planning a book when this came up, or kind of how did you know that this was going to be a novel?
I think I did know. I think when I started thinking about it, I was definitely thinking about a book. For me, it didn't fit in my mind as a play. And so, yes, I was definitely from the outset thinking of a book, and I definitely outline and plot beforehand. And so all of that process was with a book in mind.
That was going to be my next question. What's your planning process like? When and had you ever written a novel before when you started planning this out?
So I had tried writing a novel. Yes, I had written one about my experience being a chef in Paris, and much more lighthearted and comedy. And actually, that manuscript got me my agent, which is wonderful. She's absolutely phenomenal, Stephanie Cabot. And then this was the novel. This was the next piece. So when I'm plotting, I do a very I get like a big board and a lot of Post-its. Again, I'm a very physical person, so I want to be able to see it out in space. I want to be able to move those Post-its around. At the climax, I put them higher up in space, so I've got kind of an arc shape going on. But so I can really see and kind of grasp, feel where the story is going as I'm writing.
How long did it take you to write this novel?
2.5 years.
What were some of the
and there was a
no,
there
go
was
ahead.
and my second child was born in the middle of that, so it was there were some exciting moments going on.
Well, I was going to ask you, what were some of the biggest hurdles that you had to? I think that
Yes.
that takes the cake.
Giving birth.
Yeah, giving birth. I think.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that. When did you ever come to a point where you had, that crippling self-doubt that comes to a lot of writers, like, am I ever gonna finish this? Is this gonna make any sense to anyone?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. How did you deal
All
with
the
that?
time. Yeah, I think that's something, that those are just the ups and downs of writing. I think there are the days where you read over what you've written and you're like, yeah, people might like that. And then there are days where you're like, no one is ever going to relate to this or be interested. Who cares about a sin eater? And I think that you just have to keep on going. You have to believe in your own vision of it. It's such a hard thing when you don't necessarily have someone there cheering you on. But yeah, there's a lot of perseverance that has to be there. And I think that sometimes if I needed to, I would take a break and start writing something else, and then come back to it. But I'd only do that for like a day or so, and then I'd go back just to really keep on going.
You had an agent during the writing of this. Did you tell your agent that you were working on this?
I did.
Yeah.
And she was super supportive and said, great, show me when it's done.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
I've read some of the descriptions of the book, and some of them I'm not quite sure of the comparisons that they draw, and it's what was the one that I've seen several times? Handmaid's Tale meets Alice in Wonderland.
Mm-hmm.
Neither one of those do this book any justice. But I kind of understand where some of those comparisons come from. What do you think about the way people are interpreting the story, and what would you say to someone if they were trying to categorize the book?
Good question. So I would say, to me, it's a little bit like the Scarlet Letter meets Grimm fairy tales. That's, to me, a little bit of that's how I see it. And so, historical fiction, mystery, it's definitely dark, but it doesn't stay dark. It's a story of, honestly, it feels kind of timely. It's this really isolated woman who perseveres through that and finds her people and finds a sort of family and really finds her own strength. But it's got that dark fairy tale quality to it. There's nothing supernatural in it, but it's still got the fairy tale quality.
Right. And I think that's a fantastic description. And you're absolutely right. There are dark elements to this book especially in a grim fairy tale sense, because a lot of those stories are super dark.
Yes.
It kind of goes back to you and Grease, about little kids having no idea what these stories are really about. And when you get old enough, you're like, holy crap, why am I reading this to kids?
Yes.
But it doesn't stay dark, like you said. And there are moments of lightheartedness. There are heartwarming moments. There are moments of levity in the book. How do you balance that? And could you tell when you were writing, like, oh, this is getting way too dark. I need to transition here. Like, how do you balance those emotions and and keeping the reader in mind that, I need to let them off the hook a little bit here for a minute. Or this is, people are going to jump off buildings.
I definitely go back to, I think, the actor in me. And I sort of, I follow the emotional journey, and I kind of feel, oh my goodness, we've just been in this really deep, dark place. I need a breath of air. If I were in a performance, I'd need to change things right now. So I try to really feel that rhythm. So there's a little bit of an intuitive quality and also a kind of a visceral quality embodying it, I'd say, is how I find it. I love comedy as much as I love really dark things, and I think that they have to balance each other out. So there was a joy for me. If I were writing something really dark, me also as the writer, I needed a break. So I think a lot of that just comes from feeling the rhythms.
I know The Sin Eater is a standalone book, but you've created such a vibrant world with this book. Could there be more stories from this world and with some of these characters?
I don't have anything in the works right now, but I do love the idea of, there can be series where it's a sequential story, kind of episodic. And then there are series where the world is used again, but in a different way. I think David Mitchell does that very beautifully. And so, there's a possibility it could be out there, but I don't have anything planned right now.
Gotcha. Well, the book, The Sin Eater, is on sale now when you're hearing this. Everywhere that you buy books, that's open, we'll have a copy. There's a link to it in the show notes where you can get the Kindle edition on Amazon, as well as the audiobook. It's also out in hardcover, and we highly encourage everyone to pick up a copy of it. Megan, if people are just learning about you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, is there a place where they can connect with you online?
Absolutely. I'm at megancampisi.com, and I'm on Instagram at Megan Campisi Author.
Excellent. We'll put links to all of those in the show notes. Megan, this has been so much fun talking. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
It's my pleasure.